Good afternoon. My topic today is gardening. I'm going to discuss 3 main points. Why I love gardening, the benefits of gardening, and how to establish a garden. So those of you that know me know that I'm an avid gardener. I'm really passionate about it, and I spend a lot of my free time in the summer in my garden. And how I started gardening was with my dad when I was a kid. So I always grew up gardening, and it was how we connected, as well as he himself grew up on a farm. So it was just our family's way of life to grow our vegetables. Another great thing about gardening that I really enjoy is that I find it very relaxing and calming. There's just something about having my hands in the soil that really connects me to the earth, and just I feel really grounded from it. Also, another great benefit for myself and my wife is because she's a vegetarian. So I grow a vegetable garden, so it actually provides a lot of our groceries throughout the summer, which is really great. And about this time of year right now, what we do is canning. So all these leftover vegetables, we start canning, and we'll be using them through the winter and spring, so I really love that. Moving on, the benefits of gardening. Lately, gardens have been introduced into a lot of different environments. Some of them prisons, hospitals, nursing homes, community centers for homeless populations, and at-risk youth. And a big reason for this is because gardening has so many benefits. First off, lowers a lot of stress levels. And if you know me, you know I'm a very calm person. Could be because of gardening. Next up, for the senior population, they find out that gardening strengthens the muscles and joints in the hands and helps maintain dexterity. So that is a really big benefit of that. Also, gardening has shown results for patients that are suffering with depression and mental illnesses. There's something about it that just improves your well-being. And lastly, gardening is great exercise. And most people may think it's really casual, but once you get in there and start working up soil, it's a good workout. And a good example of this is my grandmother. She's approaching 101 pretty soon. And she's a very healthy woman. Herself, she thinks it's because she still works on our family farm in Ontario. So, good exercise. Moving on, how to establish a garden. So for this, you don't need to have a big backyard. You don't need a lot of space. Also, you don't really need to be a green thumb. Most people think this. A good example of gardening in smaller spaces is container gardening. So if you live in an apartment and have a patio, or you just have very limited space, what you can do is you can go to Home Depot, you can buy planter boxes, big pots, you bring them home, just put soil in them, and you can grow a lot of vegetables this way. Some that work really well are beets, onions, tomatoes. If you like to grow cherry tomatoes and you have a patio, you can do that and grow up. They'll grow into a big vine, and they actually look very aesthetically pleasing. Myself, what I do is I have these big gardening
Hello and Happy New Year, everyone! Today I'm going to do a vlog on DIE. Die. What a strange term. We're talking about the new year and then I'm talking about death, but I'll explain. Many deaf people don't fully understand deaf culture, and I don't mean to blame them or say that they're terrible people, not at all. And nor is it your fault. It just happens. Because everyone has choices, whether they want to understand what it means to have a deaf identity and whether they're willing to look inside themselves and do the work to find out their identity. There's so many different ways to get there. Now, once you're in a situation, sometimes there's going to be conflicts or misunderstandings. So I'd like to suggest you use the DIE method. D meaning description. So for example, you would go in and there's some kind of cultural difference. I'd say hold your judgment and put on that white lab coat and truly observe what's going on in a neutral stance. And hold your judgments until everything's analyzed. So what would you describe? And by describing, I mean do not use any emotional words, just what you saw. So the next step, interpretation, I. Now this step means that what you think that person or that situation means. So what do you think is in their mind? Why did they come to that conclusion? How do they feel? And then the last one is E, evaluation. And at that point you would decide whether the actions in the situation are good or bad. So here's an example at Gallaudet University. It's a deaf school, post-secondary institution, and a student's coming down the hallway, and there's lots of people chatting, and the one student takes out their cell phone and proceeds to talk on the cell phone in the presence of other deaf students. The deaf students are looking at each other and at the student, and one deaf student goes over to the student with the cell phone and informs them that that's not an appropriate behavior and that you should be texting or using Skype because that would respect the deaf space that's here as opposed to using the voice. The deaf student using the cell phone was taken aback, not in a judgmental way, but just taken aback. And then they left. Okay, so that would be a situation that's described. No emotional words are used during that scenario. Okay, so now let's go to the interpretation stage. So maybe they just felt comfortable enough in this environment to use the cell phone, or perhaps it's just something that they do every day, and so why would today be any different? They're just used to using it. I mean, whatever, you just use your cell phone. That's the world, that's their right. And for the deaf student to come over, perhaps they thought that, oh, well, that student thinks they're better than me. And there would be a little bit of a misunderstanding or perhaps a bit of an interruption to the conversation. Or perhaps even the college policies aren't clear in the relation to cell phone usage. So that's the many different interpretations you can take from many people's sides of view in that situation. So let's go to the last step, E, evaluate. I would caution everyone to not judge too harshly, but however, that situation, I'd say that perhaps the person was rude, or perhaps they were not aware of the imbalance of power and the history. And so once the deaf student, you can evaluate the student's behavior as being rude. Or perhaps it was just their everyday experience to use their cell phones. And then the attitude of the deaf person coming to correct them was very harsh. And so in a way you can evaluate both of their responses. Or a third scenario where the deaf student with the phone is, their mind is open by the concept that they shouldn't be using the phone in the presence of deaf people. They fully understand that that is not appropriate and puts the phone away in an act that would respect all the deaf people in the environment. This is a complex issue, isn't it? And so I really would recommend that you would hold your judgment and go through these 3 steps before you make a flash judgment on anyone. It's always important to step back and look at the whole picture. And also going through the steps would force people to go